New experiment to start out. This is the Invisible Obvious podcast, a place where curiosity conversations happen to explore the impact of actions and inactions that affect our daily lives. I'm your host, Daniel Paulus, and today I'm excited to welcome CJ Casciotta. This is a new friend. We are like brothers from another mother, and I'm really grooving on his thought process, his narrative, what he's trying to get out there. So CJ, I like to have folks introduce themselves. Why don't you start us off? Tell us a little bit about yourself and how you got to where you are in your professional life. You can lace in personal stuff, obviously, but we're trying to put this out there for people that are trying to think a different way. So take it away, man.
Sure. Yeah. Well, my name is CJ. The last name doesn't fool you. It's Casciotta. It's Italian, so I hail from Long Island, New York. And as a kid, just grew up loving comedy and theater and drama and cartooning and everything creative, and was always trying to figure out how to put that into a professional application. And so went to school to do traditional film studies in Los Angeles. Right around that time, a little thing called social media, the internet really started popping and going all crazy. So figured out sort of how to pivot pretty early on, became sort of well known in small circles as a social media guru. Remember those things? I wasn't.
Oh, I didn't know you were that man.
No,
I just learned.
I wasn't, though. I mean, I was a 23-year-old who knew how to use Facebook. That was it. That was, people
That's all
thought.
it took back in the day, man.
That's all it took.
That's all it took back in the day. Right? Yeah.
I sort of, parlayed that into freelancing, then realizing that when you're doing freelancing and someone says, well, that's cool, you know how to use Facebook. Can you build me a website? In my head, I'm like, no, but I said yes on the outside, learned how to use WordPress templates and started to design. And then I started really getting into how can I bring in sort of the video aspect of the stuff that I learned. I've always loved filmmaking and telling stories and everything. And so freelancing kind of became this sort of micro little agency that I was running out of Southern California. And then at some point got really, really into it was a season of just trying everything, right? I mean, because again, people were asking, can you build a website? Yes, I can. Can you do social media? Yes, I can. Can you do X, Y, and Z? Sure. And then in that process found that the two things that I really love are messaging, helping dive into people's language, helping them sort of narrate who they are as an organization, the soul of their organization. And then again, leaning back on my film and video studies and my love for that as a kid, helping sort of shape that soul and shape that language in visual stories. So that sort of led me, I'm telling you the really brief version, but 10 years later, I have a little boutique production company that call it Reculture, and we say we're a messaging and production studio. And so we basically have two services that we offer. It's messaging and production. And we do stuff with kids and family, health tech, lots of socially conscious, sort of future forward organizations. And I guess the last thing I'll say that my journey sort of shifted in the past 3 or 4 years into not just doing services, but really working to develop our own IP and figure out how to license that and sort of partner with folks instead of just doing straight up, hey, this is services. Sometimes it makes more sense when someone comes in or an organization comes in and says, hey, we want to work with you. Okay, how can we build something together? So that's been a huge sort of shift in really the past 3 years. So I'm sure I'll be, learning a lot more in the next 3 years, but that's sort of my journey from, I would say, wanting to do something professionally creative as a kid to where I am now at 37.
Yeah, so that's almost answered my question. I'm also fascinated, read a great book recently about generations. What generation do you fall into?
Well,
at 37?
I am what they call I'm what they call a cusper. I've got an old soul, people tell me, and so
Absolutely.
in many ways I resonate with Gen X, but I'm officially like one of the first millennials. So I feel like, and my wife's a bit older than me. She's Gen X, and so I feel like I kind of dance in between those two worlds every day.
That makes perfect sense, and I'm more and more fascinated by the influences on each generation and kind of the assumptions that we make about each. I'm about to try to write something about that based on this book that I just read. Um, okay, so you grew up in Long Island. When did you go out to California? How old were you?
I was 18, so I went out to LA to go to school.
Oh, okay. All right. And really quickly, how did you find the culture change from the East Coast to the West Coast in
Well,
2 minutes or less?
I learned really quick that not everybody responds well to sarcasm, and I had to
Good.
curb that pretty fast. I was like, why? People were like, why are you being mean? I'm like, dude, this is just how I survived growing up. This is this is a
Right.
survival technique.
This is how we talk. That's how we talk in New
Yeah,
York.
yeah.
That's great. All right, good. Okay, so you've done a little more than you let on, and we want to talk about this today. Um, we met working on a creative project together, but I quickly found out you've done some writing. Your first book was called Weird Thinking, that kind of unpacked and walked out this narrative about your creative process, right? You had good success getting out talking about that with people, and I really love your focus on authentic messaging, I guess, right? Where there's just a ton of assumptions about what brand is and what messaging is, and
Yeah,
man, oh man, we could talk for hours about that alone, right?
yeah.
But I'm fascinated, and I want you to talk today a little bit about your new book, because I think you're on to something that I am fascinated by. I think that's a very important narrative and kind of a cause, for lack of a better word, that you're trying to develop. And it relates to the first question I like to ask people is, what does integration mean to you and how have you approached it? So why don't you talk a little bit about the book and what you were trying to accomplish in the book, and see if you can get into how integration has influenced your writing the book and how you think it's related to what the message you're trying to put out there.
Yeah, so the book is called The Forgotten Art of Being Ordinary. And what I mean by that is ever since social media, the internet really took hold, we've been putting versions of ourselves out there through avatars and through profiles and through hyper curated versions of ourselves. But we've sort of forgotten what it means to just be an ordinary flesh and blood human being and how to operate outside of having this sort of second version. Marshall McLuhan would call it like the extension of man, these extensions of ourselves online. And so, what the book tries to do is give us some handholds for figuring out how to stay grounded and tethered to the earth and to each other when it's becoming easier and easier to become disembodied and disconnected and isolated.
I love that explanation. I want to drill down a little bit because I have thought about this for many years. I think I shared with you, I wrote a play 20 years ago with this premise that we would not be talking to each other face to face anymore. I mean,
Mm,
this was before a lot of the new technology we have, right? I was
yeah.
just like seeing, I don't know, the initial chat tools and things like that, and just thinking, how's this going to work if two people aren't physically in a room together, feeling each other's energy, noticing the nuances? Now, I'm a little bit biased as a person that comes from the theater and likes people to gather and to communicate together. I have a background in church work as well, as I know you're familiar with too. And so I've just seen the value of what that is. But society shifted a bit, CJ. In the 80s, we got really enamored with stuff, right? And having things, and the technology has only sped that up in terms of what we think we need to have today to be connected, hip, whatever you want to call it.
Yeah.
So how do you kind of approach that challenge from a societal perspective? Because I'm totally down with what you're saying, and I just think a lot of people are going to be like, well, yeah, that sounds nice, but that's not the world we live in anymore right now. I mean, how do I unplug, right? Because I'm addicted to this darn iPhone, and I know
Yeah.
it.
Yep. Well, I think we need to sort of reconvene with each other around a shared set of values. Again, we're so polarized, we're so disconnected. from each other. There's a lot of disinformation and misinformation out there. I don't know exactly how to do this, and I think it's going to be more spontaneous and sort of organically organized than maybe a big UN type convention.
Right.
I don't know, but I think it's high time we, as the world has gotten more and more decentralized and globalized, really coming together and go, hey, we need to sort of reestablish a baseline set of values for what it means to be human. And if we don't do that soon, we're going to leave those value metrics to people and organizations that do not serve our best interest. And the best way to do that is on a local, face-to-face, human level. Proximity matters. It's not sexy looking often. This is why some of the greatest change happens under fluorescent lights in old sort of city hall things. It's not on TV. It's not in even the halls of Congress, right? It's locally one step at a time. But I do think those are the conversations we need to be having. What do we value, and let's reverse engineer solutions, especially when it comes to technology, from that point.
Yep. And the other thing that has been gnawing at me of how do we find happiness? People are looking for happiness or satisfaction. I don't know if we ever promised that, quite frankly, in the larger scheme of things, but it seems to me that community has a big part of that, right? Now, we have this false premise again of, we've got community through all this technology. I'm more connected with people than I ever have before. But again, not really, because it's a superficial connection, right? So speak to that a little bit more, especially as it relates to the book, because there were things I just kept, kernels of just great wisdom I kept pulling out when I read the book, thinking, yes, he's saying exactly what needs to be said here. He's not saying technology is bad. He's saying understand what it is and how it can be used, but don't give it a power beyond what it is. Okay.
Right. Well, we're in a crisis of language right now, right? Because we have so many different mediums and so many different modalities that language is getting really, really just strange and different. And, people have so many different definitions of what words mean right now. I mean, we're debating pronouns, for goodness sake. And it's happening because in part because there's so much information and there's so much to sort of come to light. And in many ways, that's good, right? That's a benefit of technology. We get to know each other more and what our preferences are, what our values are. But we are in a crisis of definitions where we need to come back to the drawing table and go, what does this word mean? And one of my favorite words, and this came from the research in the book, is happiness. I used to hate the word happiness. Bob Dylan said happy is a word for yuppies, right? But happiness and the pursuit of happiness, the way the founders of the Constitution, the writers of the Declaration, meant it, was this feeling of fulfillment that one gets when they are serving and engaging and giving back to their community. And I think if we were to recapture that definition and message that out to our generation, that would be a wonderful flag to plant in the sand and go, this is the kind of when we say that we're pursuing happiness, this is what we mean. And the way to do it, you can sure do that online a bit, for sure, but only ordinary humans can make other ordinary humans happy, truly happy in that sense, and fulfilled, and safe, and feeling like they belong.
Yep. And this technology is built, especially the social technology, to captivate our minds, right? To change the chemistry in our brains in terms of what we're taking in and what we're wanting more and more. One big concern there that I know you're concerned about and you address in the book is parenting and how that works. So please walk out a little bit about how you were inspired to address that concern of the power of technology and the negativity that technology can bring as a parent? Because I know you're really intentional in that regard.
Oh man, yeah. And just a big disclaimer, this is one of the toughest things parents have to deal with. And just because I happen to think, one way about technology and the way it works for us and our family and our kids doesn't mean that this is going to work for you. But I do think one thing that is universally true, and I will sort of, stand behind and plant my flag in the sand on, is we just need to be, as parents and caregivers, really intentional about technology and media and screen time with our kids. It's not something that we can just sort of go, oh, yeah, they have it. And it's not something we can afford to really gloss over. Now, from that
So,
point, it's going to look different for everybody.
right. So I think you landed on the right word. I don't know if people understand that very much. So intentional. What does that mean to you?
Well, I think it's having an ongoing conversation with our kids about the power of technology, the unprecedented power that they hold in their hands if they do hold a smartphone in their hands. One thing, it might seem really, really silly that we talk to our kids about all the time. They're really young. You're 10 and 5, but they'll just start taking pictures of us and pictures of people, in the house and friends and stuff. And we're always like, hey, ask for permission, please, before you take someone's picture. And that's just a good precedent to set, because you can obviously wind back the clock, or fast forward the clock, excuse me, a bunch of years and go, oh, this is what that looks like as an adult. But just setting little precedents, as simple as that.
Yep. I had a conversation this weekend with my kids. So my son is 15 and my daughters are 12, twin daughters. We're talking about screen time and how the iPhone use in particular, the research has found, is a direct contributor to depression.
Yeah.
For young people in particular. And they kept pushing back. Oh, what do you mean, Dad? What do you mean? We don't use it too much. We're not on social media. We're just talking to our friends, and we're just watching YouTube videos sometimes. I'm like, okay, good. Well, I don't want you on social media at all. You shouldn't be at this age. And so what does this look like? And what my one daughter was like, well, I'm having problems falling asleep at night. I said, do you think that has anything to do with the fact that you might be talking on your phone or looking at your screen before you go to bed? I said, we're going to institute like an hour, time frame here so that you don't have that kind of feeding your brain activity. She pushed back. No, I don't want to do that. But I'm not here to be their friend.
Right.
I'm trying to be their parents, right? So
Yeah.
I think it's hard. And to your point, we're not trying to get on a soapbox here as much as say, pay attention to this stuff. I mean, Center for Humane Technology, I'm a huge fan of. I know you know who they are, the Social Dilemma Netflix film that put out there. These are people that have worked in these social companies, right? The biggest technology companies in the world know how these products are built and don't let their own kids use them.
No, and this is a communal thing, Dan.
Yeah.
I just found out the other day, my daughter's starting 5th grade, and she told me that they're doing Dare this year. And we were in a restaurant, and I really loudly, I didn't even realize I was being, I was like, I went Dare, and my wife and my daughter are like, you said that really loud. I said, well, I can't believe that they're still doing the DARE program. For those who don't know, it's like, I forget what it stands for. I did it when I was in 5th grade. I think Nancy Reagan started it.
Yeah.
And, as corny as we can think that maybe DARE was, or, some of the, Say No to Drugs campaigns were that, happened on a national level. Look, that combined effort absolutely, evident or absolutely resulted in drug use going down, tobacco use going down in an entire generation. And it did have, a positive net effect. I can't believe that we're still doing DARE, but there's really no imagination or no modality for the public school system, for any sort of, community, development when it comes to how to use media and technology ethically. And so what happens in that wake is that parents can seem really like top down and, oh, we don't want you to do this, and I'm going to be stern about it, versus an education that invites the kid, the student, the what have you, the child, into a conversation about what's actually happening to their brain and to their body when they are addicted to these devices that we've given the entire planet.
Yeah, no, that's so important. We could talk about this for hours. So I appreciate you touching on that. I want to take us back a little bit to, how that relates to the integration piece for you, like putting the book together. Just lay out a couple other pieces of what are in the book for someone that might be interested in picking it up. Because it definitely addresses parenting, like we just talked about. It addresses kind of the technology challenge of how to be human in a metaverse world. But what are a couple of the other chapters that, you think might be of interest to folks besides all of them?
Well, I think my favorite I think my favorite chapter, it's the longest chapter, but it's my favorite one, is on this concept called kayfabe, which, being a
Oh, yeah.
cusper, being somebody who, kind of lives in both world of Gen X and millennials, I grew up watching pro wrestling. And what was really fascinating about pro wrestling, it was kind of like early social media, where you had these personalities that behind the scenes, they knew they were playing characters, right? But in front of the
Yeah.
camera and in front of fans and in front of impressionable fans, by the way, kids, they were sort of presenting themselves as real. And that is influencer culture to a T right now. That is what we're doing on a massive scale. You can even argue that we're doing it in our politics.
Oh, yeah,
And
yeah.
we're
No.
putting a fast one on grown-ups too. And so
Yeah.
that's one of my favorite chapters, where I sort of break down kind of the origins of this idea called kayfabe, which, again, in pro wrestling terms, is being fake, but kind of wink, wink, nudge, nudge, don't tell the audience, and act real, and how that mindset has really clouded us in the media technology age.
Yeah, that was so interesting to me. I mean, I think Dwayne the Rock Johnson's a perfect example of that, right? His character was always had the eyebrows going. It was kind of the
Yeah.
wink, wink. And quick side note, so funny you say that, because growing up, I would watch pro wrestling. My dad would take us to these matches, right, at the local high school. So we'd see some of the old timers, which I won't even mention because nobody will know who they are. But so they'd be in the ring and they'd be playing this whole thing out, right? And then after one of those matches, we were out in the parking lot and we heard the guys, that were total like adversaries in the ring go, "Hey, what bar are we going to tonight for a couple of drinks?"
Right.
It was hysterical. But you
Yeah.
knew there was a safety in knowing they were putting it on, right? There was still you could see through the veneer, right? Even
Yeah.
as a kid, you were like, okay, they're athletes. This is fake, but it's entertaining. And now that line is blurred entirely from,
Yeah.
you use Hannah Montana as an example, all the way up to, I mean, plenty of people we could talk to, which is, again, scary for both kids and adults. So
Right.
I think that's a super important read and a great insight in the book. Okay, let's pivot a little bit to talk to me about integration a little bit. I know you've done a lot of personal work. You're influenced by some of the great spiritual writers from
Mm.
different faith traditions. And let's kind of from there go into this question about accountability and how you've seen that in the different partners you've worked with, or what the challenges you've seen around that. Because I think people are well intentioned. I think they want to feel like they're doing their personal work to get to a level of integration, which then helps you get to a deeper level of accountability. I think when you know who you are and what you want, it's easier to say what you don't want and set boundaries. But I'm
Mm.
fascinated with this to try to work with this in the business world, because I've seen it everywhere I've gone. And
Yeah.
I know you work with a lot of partners. So however you want to answer that,
Yeah.
multifaceted.
Gosh. Yeah. Well, when it comes to messaging and storytelling work, we're Reculture, my company. It's like, I always say, like, we're not for everybody. Like, we're not going to give you sort of just a high level sales, messaging sort of framework, or create a video based off of that framework. What we're really interested in doing is getting key stakeholders together, leaders. And by the way, everyone's a leader. So everybody kind of in the company, through research, through workshops, through sort of design thinking, we call it weird thinking, empathy, sort of research, conversations, to get on some semblance of the same page. And my favorite thing that happens in some of these workshops that that I lead is that moment when people realize that they're not really there for the thing that they thought they were there for. They're not really there for the 3-word sort of tagline. Even though we're going to get to that at the end, they're there to sort of work out their differences and solve some of these underlining conflicts and confrontations that are keeping them disintegrated, right? And of course, we know, disintegrated, eventually you disintegrate. You become nothing. And so what I really love doing in sort of a work setting is helping kind of facilitate conversations and moments that get people back and integrated with themselves and with each other, so that the story that they tell and the language that comes out of there, again, it kind of goes back to the same thing as the whole pursuit of happiness. When they use a word, when they use a catchphrase from a tagline that we might eventually come up with, they know what those words mean because they're on the same page about them. So that's kind of my take from like a corporate standpoint. From a personal standpoint, it's an ongoing journey, but one of the reasons I wrote the book and decided to call it, The Forgotten Art of Being Ordinary, is because I personally struggled a lot with this idea of having a presence online and trying to be just an ordinary human. And I remember there was a point where, I felt kind of like an addict, where I had my phone and it dropped one day and it shattered. This was like maybe 5 or 6 years ago, and I went, great. Thank you. Instead of going, oh my gosh, I can't believe my phone shattered, I was like, hallelujah, get this thing. Yeah, I'm free. And I was like, I might have a problem. So, but I remember, I was coming out with another, the Get Weird book at the time. And I had this following on Instagram and everything. And it took me a really long time, but I decided to sort of delete that world. And what kept me from doing that is I was afraid that I would go away. A piece of me would go away because I'm deleting myself. But I had to realize I had to sort of disassociate from this online kind of metaverse avatar version of myself and the flesh and blood, grounded, valued human being that I am. I don't know if this is a prescription necessarily, but I will tell you the very paradoxical thing that happened shortly after was that I did more business, I got more work, and it was more of the kind of work and business that I really enjoyed doing. On all accounts, I was kind of more successful after I sort of gave up this notion that I had to project success and an image of, sort of got it all together online. So really interesting to me, at least.
Well said. And I think that speaks to, CJ, what I, as a Gen Xer, am highly wired for, and from a personal perspective, is just this hunger for authenticity, right? Now, I grew up in a family business. I've been in front of people my whole life. I was in the entertainment business for a long time. I know what that other thing is. And part of the reason I stepped away from the entertainment business was I felt this disconnect of myself as a commodity versus who I was as a person. And it just didn't align for me, especially as I thought about trying to have a family and go deeper into my experience, which counterintuitively is not about me, right? No. It's about how I help other people and be of service to other people, like we talked about before, because I just kept seeing this kind of narcissistic laser, every place, and just thought, that's not what I want. Now, I'm not judging people that have made different choices, but it wasn't what I wanted. And I saw it at a very high level with very successful people. So that was the gift for me. And I made some conscious choices, in that regard. But I just think people are hungry for authenticity, especially young people. They're very skeptical. They don't believe the sell anymore. They're super hungry for community. So if you're leaning into those two things, right, you're coming from a place of strength, and you're also coming from a place, which the last question I have is vulnerability, right? So this is, people are so afraid to be vulnerable in their personal lives. But man, how often have you seen vulnerability in a professional setting, man? I mean,
well, what's really brilliant about the work that you're doing is that you're pairing authenticity with accountability, and those two things aren't often paired together. What's really kind of interesting about the social media world and the influencer world and sort of just the zeitgeist of pop culture right now is that, everybody's talking about being authentic. It's great. That's not big news anymore. Like, be authentic, be yourself.
But
What we're missing, though, is a level of accountability and community that comes with being authentic. So, how many times have you seen an influencer be like, I just got to tell you right now, I want to be vulnerable with you. I really
yeah,
said this bad thing the other day, or I, did this, or I shouldn't have done
yeah,
that. What we're missing, though, is because we don't have that actually face to face proximity thing that I'm talking about in the book, where you have fans and sort of followers and people are praising the person for being authentic, but they don't know how to hold that person accountable. So what do we have? We have cancel culture. We
yep.
have sort of these altruistic sort of versions of or stand-ins for accountability. Where really what accountability is the ability to sit shiva, to borrow a Jewish term, to
Yeah.
sit in that uncomfortable authenticity, someone else's vulnerability, and say, I'm going to travel with you on this journey, and I don't have to say much. I just need you to know that my presence is. I need you to feel my presence, um,
Yep.
and that's a lot harder to do than to cancel somebody. It's a lot harder to do than to write something on social media and reply to somebody and say, "Oh, look, that's again, that's a stand-in for accountability."
I appreciate that very much. That's an insight that I will remind myself of. And again, it may be I take that for granted from my life experiences. Accountability has always been very important to me because see people that make big promises and then don't keep their word, and there's nothing more disappointing in some ways, right? Because
No.
there's this fall from grace of like I thought this is what you were going to do, and clearly that's not what you're about for whatever other reason.
Yeah.
So I appreciate that. All right, we're going to wrap it up here, man. We could talk for hours, but I want to end by asking you, what are you hopeful about? It is a crazy polarized time right now. Um, Before I do that, I just heard a quote today from a speaker, a new book I'm reading. Discomfort is the price for a meaningful life.
I love that. Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
This again, like you want to be comfortable all the time, probably not going to be very meaningful.
Yeah.
You've got to be able to sit in those places of accountability,
Yeah.
and say, is this really right? Or just wrote a blog recently, just because you can doesn't mean you should.
Right.
Right? I mean,
Right.
and we have this FOMO culture of like, if I don't do it, I'm missing out on something, right?
Yeah.
And I've never been more satisfied professionally, CJ, when I've been able to say no to things.
Oh,
I mean, it's just hugely empowering, right? Because
well,
it's like, it's not a quick no, it's a well thought out no, but it then frees me up to focus on things that are more important. And I feel like I've been decisive in a productive way for the organization and the company. So, but
man.
anyway, take us out with what are you hopeful about? This can be personal, professional. I mean, I know you have a family. You chose to move out of kind of the urban area into a more, I don't want to say rural, but I mean, just tell us quickly where you're living so people get a sense of that,
Yeah, we live in Columbus, Ohio, which in a little suburb called Westerville, which we picked to be closer to really dear friends who honestly feel like family. And we're having the time of our lives. It's Columbus has everything that a bunch of major cities have. It just probably has like less of them. So I've got my three great,
Yep.
coffee shops. I've got my five, Michelin star restaurants. I don't have 10, but I got five. Columbus is a very cool, and people aren't like, knocking down Columbus's door to have a party. It's not a tourist place, but Intel's moving in. I'm actually so to answer your question, I'm actually really deeply hopeful about the Midwest and some of these flyover cities, some of these places that are a little bit more protected from climate change, at least in the immediate future, because I think people are recognizing that in a era where you can use, let's talk about the good stuff about, or the good parts of media technology, can work from home, can use all these benefits of media technology, but don't necessarily want to stay in this rat race of having to sort of project this super image, this hyper curated image of themselves. I think people are saying, I don't necessarily need to have my home base be in New York and California and some of these hubs. I love those places, by the way. Nothing against them, but I think we're starting to see a great migration that happened since COVID. Once people sort of woke up and went, "Oh, I can work anywhere." Well, let me imagine where I would want to call home. And for us, that was Columbus, Ohio. Never thought it would be, but we have dear friends there, and we decided proximity matters. We want to be close to people who can hold us accountable, who could be in community with us, who we can be authentic and vulnerable with. And that's what I'm hopeful about. I think that's a movement that's starting to happen in really across the country, and especially in the workforce now. Millennials and Gen Zers who are going, well, wait a minute, and even Gen Zers who are going, wait a minute, let me reimagine what my values are. Again, it goes back to values and language.
Yep. Awesome, man. CJ, I love talking with you. We're going to talk a lot more offline here. I want to thank you for encouraging me to try out this podcast thing. There are a million of them out there. And you said, I wouldn't tell many people to try this, but, you're kind of an interesting guy to talk to, and so let's see how this goes. You're number 2. I'm going to take us out with a little bit of music if I can do that right and shut this thing off. And all right. Thank you again for your time today, buddy. I appreciate it.